Good morning and welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do on officehours.global. Our first hour is, as always, a general discussion of production and IT-related topics where we answer audience-submitted questions. Our second hour, typically a deeper dive into a topic. And today our topic is going to be election graphics review. So we'll be kind of breaking down and talking about what the major networks and the other alternate sources have done in terms of putting the graphics packages around the election process we've just gone through in the U.S. So that's what's on tap for today. Everybody, nice to have you here. And let's dive into the questions. Jason, what do we got?
Actually, I don't think I'm going to be reader. I thought it was going to be
I'm sorry.
Mitch. Am I wrong about that?
No, go ahead. Mitch.
Jason, go for it. It's a good time for you.
Well, no, let's not confuse the back end folks too much.
All right, sorry. First question is in from Todd Raines in Allen, Texas. Has anyone tried the Roland Web Presentation Dock, the UVC-02? It's on sale at B&H, and there's a link to it, and I think it's like, it's about $100, something like that.
I haven't even heard of it, but if Roland has been around the industry for a long time. They come out of the music business. They make a lot of good stuff. I have never used this particular piece, and actually I don't think I've ever used much Roland gear, but that doesn't say anything about it. Nobody else is raising their hand on it, so this must be one of those circumstances where the panel just doesn't have a lot of information on this particular product. B&H does go through and they tend to sell things that work, and they certainly do stand behind things. So that gives me a little bit of confidence. Oh, Mitch has a thought. Mitch?
Yeah, Roland has been making, front end stuff like that for quite some time, longer than Blackmagic, for that matter. And they have a huge number of products in that product line, some even with the T-bar on them. So I like them. I know that one of the people on our group here, Javier, has been spending quite a bit of time with the, was it not the Roland that you had before this, Javier?
No, I'm actually using the Behringer, but actually my thoughts on that would be pretty, what I was going to say is that it's cool that this kind of products that I haven't used but look like very simple. Sometimes when we use it or we see it as quote unquote professionals, you see it and it's like it's missing this or it's lacking this other thing. But as people start doing like conferences for everything and working on Zoom, and I think all these like user interfaces and cameras that maybe look simple for people that know better, but for someone that's just getting into it, is gonna up the level of their audio. It has like a big talk button or mute button, and it's very simple to use, and I think that it may work for a lot of people. Maybe it's not like the professional tool, but Roland has a great track record for doing like great things that are not like they're not at the top of the level, but they are good things for the price.
Absolutely. Chris Fenwick.
I think it's important to remember that they decided they couldn't sell it for $330, so now they're going to try and sell it for $200. That has to tell you something about something that's radically on sale. Also, very interesting, it has an HDMI in on an audio switching device. So they're just sucking the audio off the HDMI, and it's one of the inputs that you can mix in. I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, it's a $330 device that they couldn't sell. So buyer beware.
Okay, fair enough. Let's head on to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael's and Elgato has released Stream Deck Plus with knobs. How about that? What production use cases could you see for said knobs, and does Companion support them yet?
That looked pretty interesting. I hadn't known that they came out with that. Just saw it. Tom Ferguson's going to start us off here.
Well, I've got a question for Chris Fenwick, and that is, would he give up his MIDI controller if this would substitute for that?
The back end's expecting Mitchell Hill next, so let's go to Mitch, and then we'll get Chris's response to that.
All right, sounds good. And just what's interesting about it is that I like the idea of knobs because there's a lot of things that need that kind of a variable input rather than just a binary on-off switch. Color correcting would be one of them. Audio levels. Those are two applications I can think of that would be nice. Don't know anything about the companion support because I don't have one.
And Chris Fenwick, your response to Tom Ferguson's allegation.
It's an interesting question, Tom. Clearly, I don't know. I didn't know this thing existed until like the countdown to the start of the show. But you were right. It does have a the little visual screen on it. Here, I could show this. Here we go. So here's the little visual screen on it. Not only is this feedback, but it's also, this is buttons. And then here's your knobs down here, of course. I mean, it's
so it is a little mini touch screen.
It is a little touch screen. Yeah.
There you go.
That would make the knobs very versatile.
Yeah. And the device very confusing. I don't know. You got to remember, yes, it's a thing, but now you need all the software support. Also, my MIDI controller doesn't talk to my computer. My MIDI controller, and I have, for the record, I have the Korg Nano Controller 2. My MIDI controller talks to my MixPre directly. There's no software on the computer to talk to it. So this introduces the power of the computer, but also the complexity of the computer. So I would say, specifically to your question, Tom, no, the MIDI controller works really good with the MixPre. But this is a solution for a problem I don't have. So I'll have to look into this.
It's interesting, the knobs, it's a different form factor. Elgato obviously has had amazing success with Stream Decks. I know very few of my streaming friends who don't have one or more in their workflow somewhere. So it's interesting that they decided that a more analog-like control, and that they kind of sort of resurrected the Apple Touch Bar idea a little bit and put it on an audio interface. That kind of surprises me. I don't know whether it's modal like that and you can suddenly turn it into a volume control and slide your finger if you like that more than the rotary pots. But overall, it's just a fascinating thing. And I think it's something that we'll be diving more deeply into as people get used to it. Chris, you had another thought?
I have another request, Bill. Mm-hmm. I know that you now live in Southern California. You live very, very close to the border.
Yes, I do.
3 syllables in Elgato.
Elgato instead of
there. You always slip an extra little e or something.
Oh, Elgato. Yeah, you're right. I do. I always
you do it all the time, and I've had it. I want you to fix it. This is a show about talking. We talk, and I think with it we should talk properly. Elgato.
I am corrected, and thank you for that. I will probably never see this word in the rest of my life without thinking of the last 2 minutes.
We should at least talk properly. That's what we do on this show.
I am chagrined and corrected, which is the most important thing. Thank you. Peter Sargent has a note.
Well, to answer the other half of the question, Companion does not support it. Remember, this was just released within the last 24 hours. However, the feature request has been put into the GitHub project.
The feature request for some modification?
For Companion to support this Elgato Stream Deck Plus.
Yeah, you'd have to think the protocol of what's coming out. They've done some new research. There has to be some new chip intelligence in there taking care of this.
And for those of you who don't know, there's both a beta and an alpha version of Companion. And so the alpha version is where this will hit first.
Interesting. Oh, and Alex is here. Alex, how are you? Good morning.
I'm doing well. I only have one question. Is it shipping? Is it shipping? like, oh my gosh, that looks great.
Yes, it is.
Sure is.
Okay, Alex, you've lost some money this morning. Sorry about that. Next question.
From Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. Paul asked if a panelist or producer wants to do a show and use Mukana or Mukana Lite, just making that up, for questions in chat, what would be the process for making that happen?
And Paul, you are in luck because Alex Lindsay just popped in, who knows everything about that. Alex?
These guys ping me on Discord and talk to me about it. It depends on what you're doing with it, but we are definitely expanding the use of it pretty rapidly.
Excellent. Mitchell, you have a thought?
I was going to say wait for Commenda or what name is that, Alex?
Commenda. Just remember,
wait for Commenda to come along.
It's showing up for comments, so Commenda is it's not much of a jump yet.
And speaking of that, Alex, since you weren't here at the beginning, do you want to slip into the host role, or do you want to continue to be a guest? Or
I'm gonna now that you're run with it, I'm just gonna sit here and be a panelist.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go on to the next question, which is my primary job.
All right, Douglas Carmichael asks, anyone used the remote review over SRT feature in Avid Media Composer? How well does it work? They have a link there for it.
And we don't have anybody. Oh, Alex just popped in. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting. Apple's got a bunch of remote stuff that they've been building up, accelerated a little bit during COVID. I haven't actually used this specifically, but there are quite a few tools that they've kind of built out and are continuing to build out. So it's definitely a thing to keep your eye out for.
Hey, by the way, your background is awesome there. I don't. Where are you today?
I am at home.
You're at home. Oh, you're getting there.
The new studio, yeah.
Nice.
So this is it's still. You'll notice that the mic is different because I thought, well, do I really need all the blankets up here? And it turns out, yes, I do, because it's if I put the old mic back in, it's very live. So
you're on an SM58.
Yeah, and I have, by the way, Courtney's not here. I see right over my shoulder there.
Yeah, do you use that oscilloscope a lot?
Yeah, exactly. Courtney, that's Courtney's. I was down in LA, and he's like, I got an oscilloscope for you. So
that's awesome.
It is. Yeah, I thought it was good.
In ensuing weeks, I want to know what's in all the parts bins back there. But for right now,
you don't like. So that's the whole thing. You're going to constantly see this kind of constantly changing and playing around because that's got to change. You can see that the sun is coming through. It'll move across a little bit. I got to fix that, and then the parts bins will go away, and I'll put more.
Is that a sandwich behind you on the shelf?
There's no sandwich behind me, but it sounds like a really great idea. I might go get one, in the future.
I will say the picture overall looks stunning. It really looks nice. So great job. Thanks. All right, let's get back to the show here. Momentary confusion. And next question.
Next one in from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida. Has an Elgato rep ever been on office hours?
Jason's going to help us.
I've been here since day one, but of course I haven't been to absolutely every session. To my knowledge, no.
Alex?
Of course, we have David Paskin, who is very close to being one, just given how much he knows. So we've definitely had our second hours with David showing stuff, sharing what he knows about. Oh, it's not Elgato. I was thinking of Ecamm. No, I don't know. No, we haven't had it. And here's why. I'm sorry, I resorted it. Is because the last time I asked them to come on, they said we weren't big enough. like that was the response. Yeah, this was a little while ago, but still. Then I was like, so that's why they haven't been on. So it was literally I got just shut down by their rep, and so we probably won't be coming back. They'll have to come to us.
There you go.
That's kind of the rule, by the way. If you're watching, if I invite you to office hours and you say that we're not really what you're looking for, then it's all on you after that. Like I'm never coming back. So anyway, go ahead.
Let's move on to the next question.
We really like reading questions here. I know I enjoy it. We could use some more. If you have a question you'd like to submit to this great panel, please put it in. Otherwise, we will spend some time with these for our first hour. Here's a question in from Joe Phillips in Murphy, North Carolina. Using an ATEM SDI Extreme ISO to capture classroom training for post-processing, and you have 3 extra ISO inputs. Is there a way to capture audio only from a mixer to these channels for additional sources without breaking the bank?
And I don't use the Extreme ISO. I have one of the original ATEMs, so I don't have any audio inputs for that. Mitch, you want to help us out with what's on the back patches?
I would think that you would be able to get a mix pre in there somewhere and send that audio directly into it, but I don't like using those unbalanced inputs on the Extreme.
Alex?
Yeah, I think you'd be better off finding some kind of solution that was just a separate recorder that you would sync back to this. I think the amount of work that you would do to use those extra ones just to keep them in sync, syncing audio once you get good at it takes almost no time. Like it's just like you mark a place that's there. You mark it on the new one. You slide it over. You listen for it echoing a little bit or phasing a little bit, and you move it back. And it takes. I mean, like if you had a raw recording from, let's say, a mix pre or even a Zoom or anything that there's lots of things that'll capture 6 channels or 8 channels of audio, and so you could be capturing that on a relatively inexpensive recorder. Lining that back up with the original one should not take you more than 3 to 5 minutes at most, to put those back in. And so that's what I'd recommend rather than a whole bunch of extra things just to get audio in there.
And Chris Fenwick.
I would like to give you that 3 to 5 minutes back and say, go get any device that has analog audio input and a HDMI output, and just like an old camcorder or something, plug the audio into that. Now you're going to get it actually in sync. And yes, you're right, Alex. It's very easy to sync audio if you've done it like a few thousand times.
And it's really good. Here's what I would say is it's also a really good skill to have. So it's worth the practice. Like
it's a good skill to have.
Day, like, you know, like it just and again, I think you're going to have all these. I still think that's kind of a janky pipeline.
my pipeline of going through an old
like
camcorder?
Just random old camcorders. I guess I would say that I wouldn't want to be seen doing that.
So the embarrassment factor would make you want to work a little harder.
You know, I mean, if you're doing, if it's not a problem, but you know, what happens is if you do anything that doesn't look like production and something goes wrong, it's like 4 steps towards being under the bus. Like we talk about it, like there's this thing about, you know, that there is, you know, you don't want to ever be the one in front of the bus when something goes wrong. Like that's the key in all of production, is not to be the one in front of the bus. So when you're late, that doesn't get you in front of the bus. It just takes a step towards it. When your stuff doesn't look very good and it looks like it's kind of cobbled together, it's another step. When you ask people for things in production, like some other team for tape or a power outlet or something, like another step. None of them by themselves are there, but they're taking a little stroll towards the front of the bus, but having something that looks like that people don't understand and using consumer equipment is like 4 or 5 steps towards the front of the bus. And so, and I work in large corporate events where it's like a Chinese fire drill. Like if something goes wrong, everyone is looking for who's closest to the front of the bus and then they shove them. so I do everything I can to stay away.
For $80 at Monoprice, you can get an HDMI audio embedder that you can put in your rack that doesn't look quite so janky. Everything we've said here is right. I might be ever so slightly more right.
It's good to have you back, Chris.
We missed you, Chris. All right, it's time. We've had fun with that. Next question.
Yeah, and at least I get to hear janky twice in one question. Alexander Knight from Vancouver, BC, Canada. For a Mac Mini and Zoom ISO setup, how do you send program video and audio back to the remote participants? On the Blackmagic Quad Card, is the 9th SDI port used for this?
Mitch, help us out.
No, I think that's a Genlock port there.
That will not do that job. Alex, other thoughts?
Yeah, it's a reference return. In the Quad, you could use one of the other ones. Remember, the Quad can go both ways. So you can define another SDI input into, you know, as one. You can, I think they work in pairs, but you can make one of them an input versus the output. So that can be something you can define in the Quad Card. I have to admit that usually when I'm sending it back, for whatever reason, I tend to be superstitious about hardware. My Quad is my output, and if I'm going to bring something in, I'm going to bring it in some other way. But you can absolutely use the Quad for a return.
And if you want more reference and to do a little research on the internet, look up what a lot of us use, interruptible feedback, or an IFB. You heard people talking about IFB a lot. That's typically a mix minus sent back down the line to somebody so that they can hear everything except themselves at a mix. And if you search on IFB, you'll at least get to the pages that discuss this process of going.
You're just saying to build a mix minus to re-embed into that, and typically right. the audio return that I would send back to folks probably on almost all of our systems come through via Dante. Like we can send them video back, through that video output, but usually how it gets to the computer for program to go back to participants that are being pulled from a show is Dante.
Yeah, I was just noting. He said send program video and audio back. Sometimes it's two separate. All right, let's move on to the next question.
Paul Valhus is back from Austin, Texas, asking, what are some suggestions for after-hours labs and workshops, and where is this discussed in Discord?
Javier is going to help us out here. Javier?
I think the Discord channel is just as like after second hours workshop or idea, What I would really like to do or see or labs would be for Frame.io, especially camera to cloud. That's a workflow that I haven't really understood, and maybe if someone knows how to do it, it would be great. Also, maybe an audio restoration tool, because I've done some audio restoration where there's like a lot of tools, like from a different ranges that maybe someone can shed some light, like better examples and everything. And the other one is I'm a little obsessed right now for like 3D graphics. I mean, like USDCs and all of that stuff, because I'm pretty sure that Keynote and Pages and pretty soon they're going to have like this integration where you can have these models. So knowing how to build them, or at least like modify them for a simple, you don't have to be like a 3D artist, or even there's like this iOS app I've been playing around called Nomad Sculpting, or Nomad app or something like that. And you just take like a piece of clay, like virtual clay, and you can shape it. And it's like a very inexpensive program to do 3D assets, but you have to know how to do it. So if someone has any of those skills, I would be very interested in those labs.
Interesting. Alex?
Yeah, those are great suggestions. I mean, I still would love to do one on Swift where we all start coding together, to figure it all out as a group, where most of us start at zero. There might be some people that are a little ahead of us, but we all kind of, and see if we can find someone that is an instructor or someone who knows enough that they feel like they can teach us. And we all kind of start build an app together. I think would be a really fun thing to do. I agree with everything that Javier said as well. I think that Substance is really good. Substance 3D is a good one, and I think you can download a demo. So maybe we time it with some of these labs. We could time the labs, like we're going to do a couple labs that are all happening during the demo period, so that you can decide whether you want to actually rent it or not, or at least do it within a month to month. So that people can play with it, so you can decide if that's something that's great for you. But I think those are great suggestions.
As long as I've been around here, I'm not completely aware of whether Discord has a section for after hours, does it? Because that might be
the best place to talk about it, the best person to talk to about it as far as actual scheduling is Brandon Buttram. So he'll if you find him on Discord, he's the one kind of manages after hours there. So he's the one that will start figuring out where that would go, et cetera.
Perfect. Peter Sargent had another.
I was about to say Brandon is the guy I've been talking to because I've been coerced into putting together a Mimo Lab, a Mimo Live.
Well, I want to know when that one is. Absolutely. Yeah. So
I've been coerced.
No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in second hours, Josh Kaufman is the person to talk to, and if you're interested in after hours stuff, then Brandon is the person to talk to.
There you go. You've got some direct contacts. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael. Douglas asks, what would be the most comfortable to use for comms on long shows? Would a headset with a mic or head-worn mic be easier than a mic mounted on an arm and separate headset?
We're going to start with Tom Ferguson. Tom?
Well, I would start with what I'm wearing right now, and they're the Open Comm by Shox. Here it is. You do have your microphone if you want to use that for your comms, and it leaves your ears open for getting program audio or anything else you want to hear what's going around, but they're very comfortable.
And Mitchell.
Yep, Tom nailed it. That's the answer to the question. I would, however, like to suggest a different name than Shox to Skull Shakers.
There you go. And I had my hand up for this before I started in this chair today. So for me, the idea is, do you need to move around? Generally, if you don't need to be mobile, then a mic like we use at our desks, because we're in a fixed position, the whole thing, I find easier to work with. I don't like to wear a headset unless I have to, because in case I have to get up and run out or something like that. Here, I just have a small IFB I have to pull. But if you're on the road or anywhere you have to get up and move around, a wireless connected head-worn mic, I think, is the class of the pack. Alex, your thoughts on this? Oops, you're muted.
Obviously, my kit isn't all put back together yet. I use the Shox myself, and for exactly the way Tom talks about it, is that I can put a set of headphones in that is the program of the show and have comms sitting on top of that. And that works really, really well for me. In the past, I've also, from a Bluetooth perspective, I have used the Parrot 450s. The Parrot 450 is a really good one that's super solid. It has long distance and just works, and it'll last all day. And then finally, if I'm using wired headsets into a real real comm system. I tend to use the clear comm double muffs because it just pushes everything else out. And I like those a lot.
And next question.
Mike Muddy Schlegel from Raleigh, North Carolina, has a question. I saw a session at Zoomtopia on the importance of body language, and the presenter was recommending a wider camera angle than the Fenwick framer. How was the Fenwick framer selected, and when might a wider shot be useful?
And the inventor of this process that you're watching today, Alex Lindsay, is going to weigh in, but Chris Fenwick is in line ahead of him, so Chris is going to go first.
If somebody wants something different than the Fenwick framer, they're wrong. No,
Defending your territory.
The reason this happened was, and I have the photo somewhere. I wish I could pull it up quickly. Earlier on in office hours, the history of this organization, I was at my house in Sacramento, and I turned on the show. And I was watching on like my, I don't know what it is, 65, 85, it's big giant TV on the wall. And there's Alex Lindsay's in my living room like this giant head. And I had been sort of trying to encourage him to back off a little because of the lower third stuff. But when I started playing with it, and I realized that if you put up your classic thirds, that this was a comfortable shot with the eyes and the chin on the thirds. And so I drew it up and I started playing with it just on my own. And then I started using it during mic checks. And then people started asking about it. And then I went away for a week and I came back and Preto was telling me, he goes, yeah, Alex called your thing the Fenwick framer or something. Like somebody did. And I didn't know that had happened. But sure, body language is important, and Alex and I have talked about this, about modifying this and making it a bit wider. And I spent like a couple hours one day going through a whole bunch of stuff on YouTube and just grabbing frames. And I will say that, and my focus is going to be off, that a little bit wider, I mean, so you can at least read somebody's t-shirt, right? You should be able to read the t-shirt, right? A little bit wider might be good, but I don't think when you get into body language, you lose the intimacy. So that's the balance that you're trying to find. Ultimately, a community like this just has to come up with a standard, and I just got lucky because somebody liked it, and it took Alex a while. He looked at it and I said, do you want to make, is this what you want to do? And actually the other thing that was interesting was Jason. And Jason, you were part of how I came up with doing this because, you have this gigantic vertical hair thing going on, which is
it's too long now. I'm getting rid of it.
I know,
today.
right? And so when people were talking about headroom, they were framing for hair room. And that put the face, the part of the human that I'm talking to, much lower in the frame if you're going to make room for all of Jason's hair. And so I advocated just for saying, like, let's look at the face. So where does the face want to be? I don't care if somebody's hair goes out of frame. I'm not talking to their hair. I might be amazed by their hair, but I'm not talking to their hair.
He's amazed by your hair, Jason.
Thank you, sir.
I started losing my hair.
You want some, you can have it.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, you weighed in next.
Yeah. I mean, everybody has their own opinion about it. The reason that I think that this frame works is that it feels very comfortable because it looks very close to what you see on broadcast. So when you're watching a news coverage or whatever, it is that thing. I actually don't like it to be any wider than it is now because then I would have to iron my shirts below here, and it would be really annoying. So anyway, I don't think that would be appropriate. I mean, I think that part of what I like about the closer frame is how much of my background I have to manage, how much of my body I have to manage, how much, if I want to bring up my hands and talk about something, I can just go up here and I choose to do that, but I'm not forced to do it, and I think that is, I think it's really important as far as how it feels when I'm in shows all the time, which I'm in. I'm in meetings and shows, 6 to 8 hours a day. And I would, I want to be relaxing for me. And I find that this is very relaxing. And I also find it very easy when I'm looking at a gallery. So not so much when we're looking face to face or, whatever, but if I'm looking at a gallery, it is much easier to see what's going on for people when they're at head and shoulders. If I want any wider, I just don't see them as well, to get back to that. And it's just not as comfortable a conversation because they're smaller in frame. And so I feel pretty strongly that it could be slightly smaller than a Fenwick frame on a big monitor, just slightly, but I would never go any wider than that by choice.
The end result of my going through and looking at a bunch of frames one day, which I'm still totally open to do, is that we might want to loosen the Fenwick frame by 5 or 10%. Also, I will say that if you really do get your head in it, it's pretty good. I think that a lot of people cheat it a little too much.
Yeah.
They get because there's a big difference between that and this, that and this. So anyway, I'm done.
Alex just finished. Mitchell Hill has a note.
Yeah, it's amazing where it gets where that Fenwick framer is showing up. Here's my camera remote control, and if I click this, look what we're seeing there. That looks really familiar, Chris. And if you look really closely, I think down in the corner here, there's your signature showing up on the screen. So I just thought I'd point out that if you make any changes, it's going to have to be made on a lot of different devices out there.
Software everywhere.
Is that an NFT version of the
They'll be like, is that the Fenwick 1 or is that the Fenwick 2?
We've now created a standard. We have to leave it alone.
It's a standard. And the signature was a brilliant move.
There you go. All right. We've had fun with this. Let's move on to the next question.
Aaron Husledge from Durham, North Carolina asked, I realize that Wi-Fi is subpar for many things in production, but have people done anything with Wi-Fi 6E and streaming?
Alex.
We haven't. And I think that would be a great thing to test to see what it's like. I think that I still believe that Wi-Fi will still be problematic because of the function of just how Wi-Fi works and how it manages its connections and how the APs work, but remains to be seen.
Peter Sargent.
Well, I actually went and got a 6E access point for my house just to see, but the reality is as Alex has said all along, and I knew ahead of time, was don't use Wi-Fi for anything like this. Right? This is all wired connections out to my fiber. But if you're streaming, all it's really going to do is give you another back channel between the access points to improve the quality of the mesh. And I haven't found anything that will outrun my Apple TV. So it's, it was fine on 6. It's fine on 6E. It's not going to make a big difference.
Alex, you wanted to get back in?
Yeah, I would say that Wi-Fi works relatively well with good bandwidth if you are streaming. It's if you are in WebRTC or some kind of real-time protocol is where it breaks up. But it actually does okay with streaming. What doesn't do okay for many streaming things is mesh networks. So mesh networks there's so much jitter in there for that it can oftentimes drop in the middle of a stream. But if you're just straight Wi-Fi, you should be okay for streaming as long as you have a lot of bandwidth, because it's going to move all the packets it need to out inside of that buffer all the time, and it won't be nearly as problematic.
There you go. Next question.
Vic Fernandez from Springfield, Missouri. Anyone who has ordered from Sweetwater knows their level of service is top-notch. My lifetime spend is less than $100. I received a message from my new point of contact introducing himself. Is there any better service?
Alex Lindsay.
For pure audio, probably not. I mean, Sweetwater, is pretty high up there. I will say that the DVE store is the other one that I would say when you're looking for really, really high quality customer service, you always just feel like you're on the inside. Like when you talk to someone at DVE store, it's like you've got a friend somewhere that's going to handle the stuff for you, and they're going to figure this out, and they're going to do this thing, and then and then it comes the next day. And so I will say that Guy runs a really tight ship, and just a great. Every person I talk to at DVE store has been great. But I've been ordering from Sweetwater for pure audio stuff for 15 years. And Robert Williams, he's my guy. Like, can I call? If I'm trying to figure something out, I call him and I'm just like, hey, what's going on here? I'm trying to figure this thing out. And I don't even call with something I want to order. I call with something I'm trying to figure out, in an audio world. And he'll come back with a bunch of suggestions, say, well, this mic is really good for this, or this is, but you want to check this out. And then we sort it all out. And then I order something and then I get a little bit of candy. It's the only time I get a bit of honeys.
Ooh, that's value add right there. Mitch?
I agree with Alex 100%. Jimmy Hart is my contact over there, and I buy a lot of stuff from them. In fact, I completely bamboozled him one day when I called and I said, look, I want a mic pre, and I don't care what it costs. I just want the very best mic preamplifier equalizer that's made to man or woman. And he made a suggestion. In my case, it was the Neve 8801, and that's what I have.
Yeah, they love clients like you.
Oh, I can do that. Yes, exactly. Javier, what's up next?
Mickey in the chat is putting, and I really agree with him, that sometimes, especially for audio, there are like specialized shops that made by engineers for engineers, like True Audio, like Gotham Sound, and maybe in Mexico there's someone as well, because sometimes you need like someone that has the problem, that has to solve things in production, like help you. So sometimes they don't have like this big stock of things, or but they can help you find the right tools, because you can talk to them and tell them, I need to solve this problem rather than I have to buy this thing, and maybe they can help you with a custom solution.
And Location Sound in LA is one that I've had that exact experience with, that you're in there looking at stuff, trying to figure stuff out and talking to folks about it. You're absolutely right.
I was going to mention them as well. For location audio recording, they have all the pros in there all the time and pretty much know that industry backwards and forward. Jason has a thought.
+1 again for DVE store. But also, Gotham Sound is incredible. They're just, for very specific things, Mickey's guy has been pretty incredible.
And Mitchell.
What's interesting about these companies like DVE Store, B&H, Adorama, all those companies, Sweetwater included, is that it's an easier place to look something up and get the specs and details on a device. And then the added bonus is a lot of times there's a Q&A, which will give you a little insight into the device, and reviews. I kind of avoid corporate websites because I know I'm getting the straight stuff from those websites.
Yeah, and I will just say regarding our friend Guy in the DVE store, it's one thing because we know Guy. He's been on the panel, and so we can call and talk to Guy. I have gone to the DVE store and not talked to Guy and had just an interaction with somebody in the back end. My experience has been exactly the same in terms of follow-up and everything else. So to me, that it's the business, and it's how the owner or leader moves these ideas through the whole staff there, so that you can call anybody and get the same kind of experience. I think that's pretty impressive. Alex, you had thoughts?
And the last thing I will say, at scale, I'm still amazed every time I ping Zoom about support, and I get a response in like 10 minutes. Like and then things get ratcheted up, and then very quickly things get either handled, or I'm told that I can't have it, or I can't have it, or this is what I need. But the speed at which Zoom works is at scale. It's not really the same as what we're doing here. Is kind of amazing. I wish more companies were like that.
Yeah, well, I think everybody knows in this era where social media, you make a bad misstep for a client, it goes far thing. They're paying attention to this. We all benefit from that. That's a good thing. Next question.
Paul Valhus from Austin, Texas. Piggybacking on yesterday's question about the gallium arsenide chargers, which specific models are recommended for the new generation of iPhones and S22 Galaxy phones? And can Apple MagSafe be used on an S22?
Alex is going to start us.
I don't know all the answers there, but the one that I have, I admit that it doesn't have a very easy to remember name. A Wodo BS. This is the one that I got that I use all the time, and it doesn't have a big name to it. It's got 3 USB-C chargers. It's 100-watt power supply, and it has been super useful. It's yeah.
Jason,
I was just about to unclick. Alex got hit all the points. I have exactly the same one, and I absolutely love it.
Harshid?
You cannot use the charger for S22 Ultras, or S22 in general, but the Qi charger is something that is somewhat similar to the Android world. The MagSafe is basically a magnet in the back of an iPhone that then they sell you the other half of it that sits on the charger and clicks it in place. So can't use that.
Interesting. The new MagSafe, I'm trying to rebrand myself from the old MagSafe being the little power connector on the laptops that everybody was upset about when it went away, to this new big circle magnetic contact charger. But I'm starting to see, as the rest of the accessories come out from this, particularly car mounts and things like that, that in the long run, it's probably going to be a better thing to migrate to. Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, it doesn't charge as fast. None of them do. And so I won't use them. And I don't even like it on my watch. Like I really just really want to plug it in, because it oftentimes it gets pushed to one side, or it gets off. So I wasn't really answering that question because I have never actually done that with my phone.
Fair enough. Next question.
Keenan Campbell, new resident of Nevada, asks, now that Fenwick has made his return to the panel, let's talk about the SEMA show and his first experience as an attendee, plus the follow-on video productions.
And let's see, who should we go to for an answer? Oh, Chris Fenwick will be the answer for this. Chris?
So literally right now, just in the panel chat, I probably should have put that in the event chat. Let me copy this and paste it into the event chat. I did the wrong thing. So, SEMA is a giant show, and I'd never been to it before.
What is it?
What does it stand for?
It's car stuff. I don't even know what it stands for. Society of Car Stuff.
Cars.
Exceptional Motoring Accessories. I'm making that up.
It's probably right. So this year it was all of LVCC, West, North, Central, South, Upper, and Lower halls. It was the whole thing. It's a zoo. It's fascinating. It's not all my cup of tea. But like, for example, Keenan and I were walking through, and there's a guy who sells paint booths, like to paint cars. And his booth was a paint booth, which was kind of cool. Very well lit, by the way. You can get anything, and it's primarily B2B. Although this year on Friday, I guess they've done this in the past, they open it up to the consumers. And so Keenan and I went. It's $100 to get in and look at a bunch of cars. If you just want to see some cars, there's a lot out in the parking lot you can see for free. So really interesting. What I would like to say is there is a group out of Australia called Patriot Campers. Patriot Campers, by the way, is a great company. It's family owned. All of their promotion is done via their YouTube show, which is called Patriot Games, no relation to the movie. And it's the kind of thing where I look at it and I'm like, I wish my family could be as tight as their family, because they take their campers out and they go explore the outback and do stuff all over Australia. They were at SEMA and they produced in a week and a half time, they produced a 55-minute, this is our take on SEMA. I will say, and that's why I put the link in the thing, I would love to go through this video and break it down shot for shot. It is awesome coverage. It is not the kind of coverage that Alex lobbies for often. The one take, let's go through and get your booth. It's not that kind of coverage. It's emotionally charged coverage. I want to know how many shots they take per booth. I want to count them. I want to look at any segment in the show and break it down to the percentage of on-camera talking, percentage of B-roll. Every time you go to B-roll, how many shots of B-roll? Are you cutting on a 4-count, 2-count, or a 1-count on the B-roll? What percentage of it are you doing 4-count, 2-count, or 1-count on the B-roll? To the music. How much of it is music full? Like, to break it down quantifiably would be a fascinating task, because I think it's a great show. And I think I'm always on the quest to quantify aesthetics. I like this. I don't like this. Why do I like it? And I think that breaking it down mathematically would be super fascinating. I don't know if I have that amount of time, but it's a great show. It was a lot of fun. I don't recommend that that's the kind of coverage that you do, because I think the Alex Lindsay approach of coverage is let's find the little things that nobody else is talking about. This is 100% opposite that. No, I mean, I'm not criticizing what you do. I think the way you like to cover things is very cool, Alex. This is the opposite of that. These guys went and they kissed butt for the people that already sponsor their show. They were promoting the people that are supporting them. But the coverage of the show itself was really cool, really cool.
Peter Sargent wants to get into this. Peter?
Well, I was just say Chad put it in the chat, but it's the Specialty Equipment Manufacturers Association. It goes back to the 60s, and it, surprise, surprise, it grew out of the hot rod era in Southern California.
There you go. Alex?
Yeah, and all I'd say is that I would love to do those kind of videos. I just don't have time. So the amount of editing that's required to make that video go well is just more than so when I say, oh, I'm going to do these one shots, I do those because it is fast and furious. It all happens during that event, and it all pummels out that day typically. Like I have my view of covering these is that I never want to think about them again once I get out of them. Like I go in, I plan for, like, my approach to NAB or CES or whatever is I'll plan for a couple of weeks of like thinking, but not full time, just like, and I'll email some folks and make sure I'm on the press list so I get all the emails about what's coming. And I have a kind of an idea. The first day I'll get there, I'll look around and I'll take pictures so I remember what I was going to cover. And then the next day I'll just cover everything, or maybe 2 days I'll cover everything. But by the day I leave, I've never had the luxury. I may be able to do that in the future now, but I've never had the luxury of I have to go back to work. And so if I don't, what I found is if I put any post into it, literally I have whole show coverage that never, like I have 2 IBCs that never made it out. I have 1 IBC that's up there and 2 IBCs that I shot all the footage. And then I was like, I'm going to do it different this time. I'm going to give exactly what you're talking about. And it's still, it's good coverage, but yeah, it didn't get anywhere because I had to go back to work.
Yeah.
It's just because, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, it's definitely 2 different approaches for sure. Because one is very much based on entertainment. One is very much based on the dissemination of knowledge. But I got to say, I watched this thing glued to it and was just fascinated by it. And I think that when you find anything that you like, whether it's music or art or something, to try and break it down and try and quantify why do I like this? It's
absolutely.
And when Chris mentioned the auto paint booth, I just had to remind myself, there is a type of jewelry made out of Fordite, and they got that from taking down the walls of a paint booth that cars have been painted in for decades. And it's really fascinating. So look up Fordite, Fordite, and you will see some interesting stuff there. Next question.
Matthias Oita from Helsinki, Finland, browsing in-ear monitors and Linsol websites. Can panel give recommendations for sub $50 options?
Alex will help us out.
Yeah, I just put it in Makana. It is now I can't remember the name of. I carefully found the link for it, and then I typed in Patriot Campers while I was listening to Chris, and now I don't have it. But it's the Linsols. They're $49 without the mic. The mics are worthless. Don't get the Linsols with the mic. And it's just a little change in the cable, and they're not very good. I'm wearing them right now. So that's what I'm wearing right now is the $49 Linsols. I have boxes of them that I send out to people if I need to. And do not get the more expensive ones. There's $150 ones or $125 ones. I bought those. They're bigger in your ears and they actually are not as comfortable. So the $49 ones are the ones that I have. And when they will wear out, there's a little plate on the front of them, on the front of the ear that will eventually fall out. It will still work for a while after that, but then you'll get a new one. So they're not the most durable versions of these things, but I keep them in all my bags because they're so inexpensive that I just have like 3 or 4 of them floating around in different bags. So I always have a pair of headphones I can throw into, but that's the one.
Next question.
Paul Valhus, Austin, Texas asks, once the panel is cast in concrete, no one can come and go. Will cameos be allowed in the next 2.5 version of office hours?
Alex?
I don't know whether it'll be 2.5 or 3.0, but it'll get pretty methodical after that. So it will be definitely something that there's process. And for the most part, the panelists will be, invited weeks in advance. So I think that'll be probably the the process there will be a lot less flexible. So if you are interested in being a panelist, you should reach out to us because this is the right time to get in and see how you do. Even if you come on and just hang out a little bit, but we'll make a lot of decisions as we go through that.
Next question.
And from the UK, Nick Batt asked, I'm using Companion to switch presets in my Visca PTZ. Is there a way to set the speed between presets? I want to do some slow preset pans.
Jason.
Yeah, there absolutely is. If you look at the companion module called Sony Visca, it'll show you all the different settings. I'll put it in Mukana chat, but they've got pan tilt speed up, and pan tilt speed down. And if your camera doesn't support those, there's also a pan tilt slow mode. And once you enable that, you're good to go.
Peter Sargent.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly what Jason just talked about. I do that on my PTZ camera that's behind me, and I can set the speed either variably, but you're setting the pan speed, the tilt speed deliberately, and then invoking the preset. Because you can't do it in the preset itself. You have to program it in and tell it to do it at a certain speed.
Right. Next question.
Stan Chan from San Francisco, California. What software is used to create this type of presentation animation?
And there is a link there. I was not able to find the time to go do that since I wasn't sure about this. Did anybody take a look at this and see? I guess maybe no one had a chance to do that. So Stan, if you can hold on your question and come back tomorrow or something, we'll try to get to it earlier and take a look and see what type of presentation animation you're involved with.
It looks like it's a write-on. So I think that what he's looking at there is it's kind of a
so like a whiteboard kind of building thing?
Yeah. It's hard to tell. I mean, again, these are the kind of questions definitely to ask before the top of the hour, so we have time to kind of play with them. But a lot of these aren't as complicated as it would look. So when I'm looking at them, some of the ones are a little bit more complicated, but a lot of them look like circular wipes. A lot of them look like circular wipes that might be activated slightly at different times, which makes them look way more impressive than they actually are, which is great. I mean, that's a great way to do that. But most of these look like basic presentation. I would say basic presentation tools. You could probably do everything that you see there in Keynote.
Next question.
Next question to Mike Beardmore from Reading, UK. I noticed that the panel screen is rounded corner framing. The 2-up has square ones, and the 1-up has no framing. How was this design settled upon?
Alex, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I think that there was an issue. Number one is I like the rounded framing, and I would prefer the rounded framing for the panelist, the 2-ups and 3-ups and so on and so forth. There was the amount of technical rigmarole when we first did it in version 1 to put the rounded corners on was not worth the effort. Like that was why that didn't get put in. It was because it was easy to put the outlines on it. Otherwise we had to key it over it. With the one that when you see the whole background, you'll see that's just a mortise that we add on top of everything. It's just a 16-up or 9-up or whatever that has a mortise sitting on top of it, and that we could round. And I keep on wanting to go back to that and round those corners in the super source. And I just haven't looked at whether it's gotten any easier, but it was not trivial to do that in the past. And I think part of it was that we were also in the very first version. What happens sometimes is you make a bunch of decisions based on things that no longer exist. The other thing we were doing is we were animating things, and animating them with rounded corners was no minor thing. Now that we're not animating them, we theoretically could put rounded corners on there, and we just have to take a look at it. But I think that the rounded corners I find them to be more pleasing. So I would love to do that, but I think that there was a series of issues that we made that decision a while ago and haven't returned to it. But that's why.
Next question.
Next question in for me. How do you get from an XCon Ethernet to regular Ethernet?
And Mitch, you've got something to show us.
Yeah, I got something to show. Let me try to get it in focus. How is it that whenever you want to focus something, you can't do it? Hello, there it is. As you can see here, there's an Ethernet plugged into what looks like an XLR, and I guess it's there so you don't pull that cable out by mistake. So I'm wondering, where do you find those things? They're not readily available. where it's a regular Ethernet on the other end because it's got to plug into my switch. So there's the question.
Okay, next question.
Next question from Douglas Carmichael. Has the Office Hours 2.0 or 2.5 team ever thought about documenting the infrastructure to both reduce operator error risks and provide us another resource to learn from?
Alex.
It's definitely discussed, and there are parts of it that are documented. A lot of it is that the train is moving, and we're continuing to change it. So it's hard to. It's like, oh, that sheet doesn't work anymore. So I think that it's not out of the question that we'll do more documentation once we finish that process. And one way that we document it also is just kind of going through it with everyone and putting it out there. The thing is that we're moving so quickly. So as soon as we finish 2.5, we're going to start discussing 3. And at that point, we have to, I think there'll be more energy spent on moving forward than documenting. But if there's people that want to be on a documentation team, let us know.
There you go. Next question.
Jeff Cohen, Miami Beach, Florida, asked, what headset mic is Peter using? Bonus points for the panel's thoughts on its sound or recommendations for something similar.
Seems to make sense to go to Peter for this answer. Peter?
The DPA 4066 going through a mix pre 3M.
There you go. DPA makes fine headset and lavalier microphones. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, in discussions about Twitter's infrastructure, the word microservices has come up multiple times. What are they? How do they communicate with each other?
That's an interesting question. Nobody on the panel has raised a hand for this one, and I'm not that familiar with the term microservices myself. Obviously, just parsing it probably takes, the idea of not making your living with products, but services, and takes it down to the little small, tiny ones that maybe you charge less for and do more volume. Chris, what are your thoughts?
My understanding about microservices is essentially in the SaaS or software as a service realm. Sometimes it's easier for me to buy, I'm going to put it this way. I'm going to buy a button instead of actually write all the code behind it. So like, let's say, for example, I needed to, I wanted to put a webcam in my piece of software or a video feed. You can, software as a service, you may be able to actually buy the feature of here is how your video pipeline goes through your thing. And now by just paying a small fee, I get that feature. I don't have to code it from scratch. The problem with software as a service is that you are creating, microservices, is that you are building your empire by leaning a bunch of other things against it, or leaning your empire against a bunch of other things. And if anybody's server goes down, your features will die. And that's the problem with microservices as opposed to just building something from scratch. Building something from scratch takes longer. It's all on you. You don't get to capitalize on somebody else's advancements. And I will also say that literally everything I just said may be completely wrong.
Peter Sargent, any thoughts real quick before we switch?
Well, microservices is a programming architecture construct. It basically says, if you go back, frankly, when I started in the business, we wrote applications in a large monolithic way. The database access, the network access, the UI was all one large program, insert expletive here. And we actually started to break them down and further break them down to now I could go in and have in the past go in and say, I want to change this particular thing that I want to do in the application, and it doesn't touch anything else, and I can swap it out almost at a moment's notice. So we've talked in after hours about, there are some banking applications that are making a couple of thousand changes a week because they have it segmented down to these microservices to the point where they can swap something out and swap something in without the end user knowing it happened.
Interesting. So it sounds a little bit like subroutines, but isolated and at a more granular level.
I think it's not just an external thing. It is a microservice. A microservice is kind of a subroutine. It's a more robust subroutine, but it is basically, I can build the core app, and the core app has to go through a lot of things to make sure that it keeps working and make sure it's integrated. But there's these little extra things, like the one that I think came up with Twitter recently was that they were going to cut off a bunch of core, microservices, and one of them happens to be two-factor authentication. So there was a concern that if you log out, you can't get back in. So because that's a little microservice that does because it's not part of the core Twitter app. It is when you log in, it's going to run you out to here and do something that it's not necessarily an external service. It's just that it's a small service with a small team that only has to worry about this one thing. And so more like a plugin where I'm going to go out and I'm going to take the data and I'm going to approve it. Like now an external service like that is if you sign into Mokana, you're doing a microservice that we contract from Google. so like it manages all that for us, and we don't do it at all.
Pete, was that from before, or do you have another thought you want to toss out on this?
I think we're out.
Okay, we're done. That means it's time to switch to second hour's panel discussion. We have some guests here, and Alex is going to take the helm back to take us into this. Alex?
Hey, so when something big happens or special happens, we often like to talk about it. And last week, in the United States, at least, we had a big election. The election's not quite done yet. So we're working on it though. And while it's still in process, we thought we'd bring some of our graphics experts in. We've got Bo Cordell and Chris Brown here, who do a little bit of graphics here and there now and again. And they are good sources for us to discuss all of this. What was the election night like for the two of you, Bo and Chris? Whoop, can't hear you.
Oh, well, I was lucky enough to be in New York for election night, and I was working at the Fox News Corporation, just basically there as a technical assist. We had designed their virtual set, and the main thing going into this trackless and tracked virtual set at that day of was making sure that all the data was working correctly. And I think that, as we'll see, I think across the board, as we talk about all this, is really trying to display data as up to date and as accurately as possible. And there's so many races that are happening. Because if you think about it, 435 House seats, which is the House of Representatives of the United States, that's, there's two candidates at least that are running for each one of those. And so that just means that you have such a large number of names to get correct, and being able to pull in that data. So that was, once that all started working correctly, it was just smooth sailing from there.
When do people start actually? And if you have questions and Lenny Nelson just joined us as well. So Lenny's here as well. Hey, Lenny, good to see you. But what I guess, and if you have questions for Bo, Chris, or Lenny, go ahead and throw them into Mokana. Question for Chris: when did you start prepping those graphics? Like when did your team start to work on them?
So I'd say discussions about scope started back in May, and then by June 1st we were working on the design for it. We were lucky enough to have clients who had a very clear vision for what they wanted out of this. They wanted to have a capital set that basically had an exterior that could be lit for either night or day, just in case they needed to carry on if the election somehow. I mean, it obviously still being counted right now, but they weren't sure if they were going to want to do coverage the next day at that same set, and then also wanted to be able to go inside this Capitol building and go to the Senate floor and the House floor, where both those legislative houses do their work, to be able to visualize the balance of power between two major parties in the United States, the Democratic and Republican Party. So they asked for that, and so once we understood that, it was really just trying to build to fit their original, I guess, goal, which was to be able to exit their set to go into this world either through a tracked camera to a trackless camera setup, or also have an engine running where you could just go in and visualize what you wanted to just through a traditional wipe or dissolve.
And Bo, you might have a couple little pieces of examples for this.
Yeah, so I was tangentially involved, which allowed me the opportunity to record some stuff and got a couple things kind of put together to show. But and Lenny might be able to speak more to some of these things. We didn't work on a lot of this stuff, but this was some of the CBS News stuff, which I thought was really impressive. They used a lot of Stipe Red Spy on the Steadicam in their studio. So you can see their floor kind of opens up, and they're doing some neat AR there.
Yeah, that is actually Stipe does the camera tracking system, and that's a Viz engine that does the AR rendering as well as the
so
set
here
extension.
You've got that ceiling set extension that was really cool. Thought y'all did whoever did that thought they did a great job on it.
And Lenny, this was something that was done in VizRT?
The three-dimensional artwork was done in Viz Engine, and that's what's doing the live rendering. Actually, there's probably about 6 engines running to do that composition.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, and one thing that I think that we've gotten better at is while we can do green screen, it doesn't mean that we have to all the time. So one thing that that I always notice is that usually the graphics sit on top of something behind it, but we don't. Yeah. There's a careful, let's not have the people be in front of the graphics, and so you'll notice how carefully everything gets really close to the top of their heads or to them, but we kind of keep the graphics on top. And I think that tends to be easier and more manageable, wouldn't you say? Yeah, it just makes it, and that's more of what I guess how we refer to it as the AR. Part of that is augmenting that rather than keying it in.
Yeah, and I think that's what you saw a lot of this election is a lot of people using Unreal Engine to do either augmented reality, whether it's through the Viz tools, through the ROS tools. You saw a lot of capital sets. Let's see, this was a one of the Fox News sets that we're familiar with, but basically you can see they're just panning over and kind of a set extension into a virtual world.
Right.
So then you fully enter the virtual world here. They're able to do all their graphics that's fully data driven and, tell the story. So it's kind of merging that, real world into digital world that we saw a couple networks do. You also saw that same kind of effect with NBC. They kind of made it a little window into their studio before they went into the fully digital world. So there you can see the camera kind of morphing from the digital camera to the real camera to the digital camera. And then Lenny, is this might be, I think this was another Viz workflow that NBC
This is Viz Engine. This was on NBC, NBC. They actually had a little bit of Unreal going as well. So the Viz Engine rendered the capital there, and then Unreal took care of the rest of the city, if you will. I'm trying to pull up a clip here on my system, but yeah, that's how that was done. And I actually have a little bit of behind the scenes from the NBC studios as well. If y'all give me just a second, I'll pull that up. I just gotta go to the right clip on my playback machine here.
Okay. And Lenny, so on this one, you can see that the virtual world doesn't change, but the foreground elements, kind of the planes change. So in this situation, are those planes coming from a different CG engine that is just video input into the?
Yes. They're actually rendered into the entire scene through Viz Engine. So there's actually multiple systems feeding into one composition engine, basically. So you got one taking in the virtual camera information, one rendering the capital, and then the foreground elements are being rendered on top of it, and they're all being composited in another controlling system. And then there's actually a graphics controller as well that can do all the transitions and everything itself, as well as another system feeding all the data into it. So there was a lot of what would we call them, sort of modules, packages put together that you can feed different data into and different graphics into. So I'm trying to find this clip. Give me 1 second.
And I think that two of the leaders in this area, of course, are what ROS is doing and what the VizRT is doing. I think those are probably two of the kind of the forefronts of what we're seeing. And so, and where else was so we had VizRT at a couple of these, and where else? And Ross was used for the Fox News. Was it used anywhere else for the election coverage?
I can say for a fact that the VizRT was used at NBC and CBS and ABC as well. Well, why did that quit playing? Okay, so here's a little bit of behind the scenes of the NBC studios. This is a pretty wild drone tour. So this is the main NBC set. I'm going to go through this a little fast, where the anchor sat when you watch the main show. And then it kind of cruises through, and then we go down the hallway, and you'll see one of the coolest control rooms you've ever seen in your life. And here we go. This was quite impressive.
Did they tell everyone to stay very still?
Yeah, everyone's sitting very still for this game we're playing.
Like, everyone be really, really still for a second. Don't stand
Don't
up.
look at it. Don't look at the drone flying by. And then it goes, through the rest of the Rockefeller Center here. So that was the main NBC stage. And then come around the corner here, go through. So there's some of the just green room people, and that was security, sorry. And then, and then we go in the elevator. I've watched this a couple times. All right, then we go down, and now we're going to the MSNBC studio control room, because they run everything out of the same place, because they leverage the same hardware and the same data sets. But again, pretty impressive with what that gallery that they have there. And then they go down the hallway to the actual studio. Yeah, and so this one had room for an audience, as you can see. And so they continue using this throughout the week for their daily shows, their morning shows, their news commentary shows. And then if you watch, there's a cool thing around the corner here. Where's that green screen shot? Oh yeah, here we go. And then this is their digital stage. So this is where the News Now one, so where the online guys are. And then here's one of the cooler sets. Okay, so this has a green screen, right? And you see some of the engineers working on it right there. And then it comes over to the touch board and whatnot. So this set is used to make, let me pull it up, this shot. Okay, so as they were showing you earlier, we got the AR, we got the virtual Capitol and everything, and then it goes to sort of a seat map. But then the cool thing is, it goes around the Capitol here, and I'll just play this. And then it comes into the actual live set where the analysis is being done. So I'll back that up a little bit so you can kind of see what happened there. So this is obviously all virtual. And then at about here on this left edge here, right about there.
And that means that the motion curve from the virtual camera has to lock into the motion control arm to match the movement into the real world, right?
Exactly. So right about there, where that edge is, you'll see it comes around, and what's kind of cool is because it's three-dimensional and it's smart. You can get the parallax there so that everything looks like it is looking through a window at it as it comes through into watching the guy do his analysis. So that was one of the cooler gimmicks, cooler tricks that they do to present this data. Elections are huge opportunities for these news stations to gather advertising and viewers.
Because there's so much money. Like the thing is that, I mean, just so everyone's watching, the reason that elections do all the cool things is because everyone's making so much money on all those election ads. So if you're going to ever do anything, you're going to do it during an election season. Like if you want to play with graphics, outside of, pro sports or whatever, this is the time to like pull all the stops out where no one's going to ask you why you spent $1 million on that, so I've grown, usually when we did the biggest, craziest projects that I worked on, it was always around election season. so anyway, Chris and Bo, is there anything else that you wanted to show or talk about that you saw or worked on?
Let's see. The only other thing I can really show can kind of show a little bit of the kind of like the operator workstation, just kind of what buttons the operators are going to be pushing. And, as is typical during a project like this, you would like to make it a lot prettier and whatnot. But you end up making it functional and move on. But basically, we have a workflow where we're able to operate 5 engines in this case off of one control system. So we can enable and disable the engines that we're talking to at the moment. On the right side, you're choosing your environment or which races you want to pull up, and then you're doing the camera flies, or you're choosing the graphics and whatnot. And like Chris was saying, it's all it's all data driven. So the data is coming from another system that's informing the graphics on who to show when. So right. It's
well, and that's very much like this is the big heavy iron version of what we do, the simple version of what we do in office hours, where we just go, okay, who needs to be in the super source? I'm just going to throw, and they, and that data is passed to it. It just throws it in there rather than someone explicitly doing it. In this case, you're saying, I want to look at this race or this thing, and all the data that's related to it is being generated. Is that correct, Chris?
So what we were actually doing, so like that operator panel is more like a technical director for like, what do you want the camera to do in this world? Okay. So like it was able to take us to a couple of different places around that set, whether it was the Capitol steps to do the race boards of like individual candidates against each other, or to the Senate or House floor. And it was allowing you to do that in a bunch of different creative ways, but all the data. So basically they have a elections team that's pulling data from the Associated Press, and then that is basically updating their own database. And they have a proprietary software they developed called Stackmaster, which is basically just a rundown system where the producer can then go and say, I want to look at Colorado District 2 for the House. Then I want to look at Nevada District 1, and like put it all in like a rundown in a traditional way that you would in a lot of these newsroom workflows. And then what we would do is they could choose to go to the next one. And our Unreal, like using Voyager, we basically through blueprints and Data Link, which is our ROS plugin that can basically parse a JSON file that their Stackmaster is putting out. Basically, when it sees data change, it would automatically change all those numbers and pull those candidate photos in and do all that automatically. So there was that operator didn't have to worry about anything editorially.
So the operator is saying, okay, this is where I want to go, and then the producer is deciding what's going to be there when you get there, right? I mean, or the content producer is going to say, I want this. And then that content producer is not really putting it in. They're grabbing data. So they're saying, I want to see the Pennsylvania Senate race. The operator is saying, go over to this space. The producer is saying, I want to see the Pennsylvania race. When it says that, it's grabbing data from Associated Press, managing it, and sticking it in there so that it can be as live as possible. It's quite a thing.
That's correct. And we also had to think through a lot of different situations where some things are just basic data that's coming from the Associated Press, like, the vote count, percent in. But then there is definitely an editorial decision based on like when a race becomes called. So that's something that gets decided by their election team, and is also a data point that comes up. But we had to think through a lot of the different situations where, like, okay, so as as numbers are coming in and the percent reporting is coming in, how do you want to show that live? Do you want it to actively update while it's on, while it's actually in program? And those are things that we had to go through a lot of different iterations. Like originally they were like, oh, well, we don't want it to change because it looks like it's popping around. But then they're like, well, we also don't want to make it look like we're fudging numbers. So then we'll let it pop a little bit. So it was just one of those things that what we ended up with was just like that balance between trying to make it look as clean as possible, but also for it to be most up to date. And
it's so dangerous, to not get it accurate because, if you're in front of millions of people and you say one thing and then, oh, no, that's not what we meant. A lot of tweets that go out after that about things. And so, it's pretty, pretty complex. It is when it comes to calling it. Well, I guess we'll get into the graphics, but it seems like everyone's probably a little bit more gun shy now, about what to say. Where those graphics are, but that's really something in editorial. What are the biggest challenges? From any of you, what are the biggest challenges in getting these graphics to work? And then we're going to go to questions.
Honestly, I think the data wise, getting the data to cooperate with the engine and knowing that like every single situation is tested out. Like, for example, the Stackmaster software has information on races across the country, including governor's races. But the graphic that we want to use it for is a graphic on the Senate steps. And we, of course, editorially in that situation would never want to show a governor's race because that doesn't make any sense. Why would you show? Has nothing to do with the Capitol building of the United States of America. It has to do with the individual state that they're running. But like, that's something that they did through their weeks worth of testing. And we were lucky enough to basically the majority of our project was done about a month out, and they were rehearsing every single day and throwing stuff at it. So you come up with these like really weird edge cases where like, okay, well, if you did want to show this, like, would it show up correctly? And like, a week before the show, we realized, oh, geez, if you put a governor in, it might still say House next to them because like we didn't expect that being a situation that they do. So that's the real thing that like you really don't want to end up in, because it's like, even though if it's an edge case that wouldn't make any sense, if someone makes a mistake, you kind of need to cover your butt, so to speak.
No, absolutely.
Well, and like Chris was saying, you're only as good as your data. And all these networks have their own like editorial desk, but like the major election data provider, I think, had a lot of issues the first several hours of election day. So, there were a lot of networks kind of scrambling. So there's a lot of ways for it to go wrong, for sure.
And what software is used primarily to build the 3D scenes that are there?
On the raw side, we use Ross has a Unreal Engine product called Voyager, and it's just Ross's custom version of the Unreal Engine. And Chris and I work for Ross, so that's where we spend most of our life in that. And then I believe Lenny can speak to the Viz solutions.
It's called Viz Artist. And actually, if anybody's interested, there is a free version. You can go and try it if you wanted to get into making some wild 3D graphics. So
and is the geometry generated is it modeled in those apps, or is it being supplied? Does it get sent from some other app?
Either way, you can model in Viz Artist, or you can get it from your Mayas, your whatever.
Is that the same on the Ross side?
It's a mixture. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's definitely like our Unreal tools are more rudimentary, like text-based and that sort of thing. And you can do some simple design, but all the more complex stuff, we were spending most of our time in Cinema 4D and Maya. Because a lot of the things we ended up realizing is just when you're dealing with a set this big, it's trying to make it performant. And when you're dealing with real-time rendering systems, aliasing is one of our biggest enemies. And I was going
to ask you about that.
Yeah. And so like you have to figure out a way like, oh, geez, well, the Capitol looks great when you're, right at the steps. But then when we fly all the way out to the reflecting pond out in front of it, and we were looking at the poll closing clock, then you're suddenly seeing a bunch of aliasing based on the geometry around the Capitol Rotunda. So then, what do we do about that? So a lot of times we ended up going is dumbing down the geometry in external, software, and then taking that mesh and basically baking it to a texture. So a lot of the stuff that looks like a super detailed model is actually just something that's pretty simple, and it's just a very nice looking texture. Because as long as you don't get up too close, it's more performant and also prevents those negative visual effects.
Yeah, it seems like for most of the AR graphics, the thing that bothers me the most is typically aliasing, mostly because I'm not used to it as a visual effects person. I'm used to we have 16 by 16 of, anti-aliasing, or 8 by 8, anti-aliasing, and without, and for those listening, basically the geometry is either there or it's not, like when it's rendered, it has to fill a pixel, and it's basically the geometry is in that pixel or it's not in that pixel. It can't be partially in that pixel. And so what happens is you get along curves, along angled edges. This is, by the way, I apologize ahead of time, this is a red pill conversation, which means once I tell you this, you'll never be able to unsee it. And you should just stop listening for a minute while I do this and skip to the next thing. But basically what happens is along angled edges and along curved edges, what you see, if it's flat, it's fine. But if it curves or angled, that geometry is going across pixels. And basically it says, I'm in this pixel, I'm in this pixel, I'm not in that pixel. And so those form little edges, little what we call aliasing, which looks like little stair steps that go down the sides and around those curves. In visual effects, the way we fix that is we render it at a higher resolution. We oversample it and then scale it down. And when we scale it down, it kind of mushes all those pixels together because it's basically using either a bicubic or other solution to mix those pixels back together. Like the countdown clocks I was building for office hours for a little while, I would render those at 8K and then put them down into either 4K or 2K, and then that mush would create those anti-aliased edges the way you want them to be. But that's a very computational, it's not a real-time solution. And that's been the challenge, right? That's the issue with anti-aliasing. It's just that doing it in real time is a thing.
And I'd like to add to anybody who's going to work in this real-time rendering space, one of the best things that I've learned is to represent your final work to your client in the way that you will actually do it. Because a lot of times, especially designers that, are moving into this space will provide clients with, these oversampled proofs that are rendered out of Cinema 4D or whatever, and they look perfect. They look absolutely like none of that. And then when they finally see real time, they're like, well, what the heck? It looks horrible. And I think like being able to go in and set that expectation up front, because it's just like there's no solution out there that can render a 16K image and downsample it. Like that's just not something that can happen in today's technology. Maybe one day, but right now it's not possible.
Yep. Mitchell?
Great examples, and I'm very impressed with the state of the art. I do notice one thing, and this is a we want more kind of attitude. I noticed that the virtual images, like of the Capitol building, is pretty good, but it's not all the way there. Is there a reason that you would try to make it not too photorealistic so that it doesn't compete with the graphics that are flying over it? Because it seems to me you do have the capability of making it very realistic.
Were you going to show something, Bo? I saw you disappear behind the graphic.
Yeah, Chris could probably speak to it, but I mean, it's this exact conversation that we're talking about is trying to make everything performant, because it's got to render 60 frames a second, 30 frames a second in full HD. So it's doing that and keeping the performance there.
Now, is it 60 frames or is it 50? Is it 5994p or I or 30p? What's the frame rate that you actually work at?
59. Well, for this particular client, it was 720p, 5994. So that actually was a benefit to us because rendering at 720p is easier now than it had been in the past, especially at that higher frame rate. But I mean, honestly, you do have to make you're walking the fine line as making it look as good as possible, but also looking at performance. But also just a lot of subtle things that you'll see here is like, it's a director's choice, because when you're thinking about working with the client, sometimes it's not about what it would look like in real life, but it's what they want it to look like, which sometimes doesn't exactly line up with how something would look like in real life. So, I mean, for example, looking here, those beams of gobo lights that are around the next post close graphic, I mean, that's not actually how it would look. Like there's not a layer of fog that doesn't, obscure the Capitol building, but allows you to see the volumetric light. That just wouldn't happen, but they wanted it to look that way. So, you're making some of these creative choices that are telling their story and meeting their style guidelines, but also might slightly take you away from what would be considered completely photoreal.
And the virtual backgrounds looks perfect right there with the graphic. And when you went all the way in and did the fly around, it got like, not quite there because it was being spotlighted as opposed to the graphics. With the graphics, it looks perfectly appropriate. So I was just saying, can you push that envelope just a little bit more if you wanted to?
I think we'll continue. It's evolved a lot in the last couple of years. I mean, I think that's the one thing that's really interesting is that we see it with processing power and everything else. We see it just jumping in leaps and bounds at the moment, as far as just being able to do it. And I think that one of the things a lot of us are tracking also is some of the NVIDIA tools that have smart anti-aliasing that's using AI to do the anti-aliasing as opposed to actually doing the oversampling. And Lenny, you said you're working 59.4 as well.
Yes. The NBC was 1080p. The N5994. The CBS stuff, I believe, was 1080 as well. Nobody's making the 4K jump yet, though. Even though a lot of this can be, you just got to throw a little bit more.
Are we still
processing power at it?
Are we still ending up in interlace for a big chunk of the distribution?
Well, yeah. Once it actually hits the transmitter, it usually is.
Oh my gosh. Sorry, it's just like when I'm asked to do it, I'm like, oh, and then how are we going to handle the interlace? I'm like, oh, when are we going to end? So anyway, but that works better in 5994 as well, because you throw away half the field, for to make that actually work. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions.
All right, our first question in from Aaron Husledge in Durham, North Carolina. Aaron asked, I'd love to hear what the panelists think of the PBS NewsHour graphics. They're some of the clearest and most concise in the business, in my opinion. And there's a link to it there.
I'll just say I did look at them in the 10 minutes I was getting set up before we started here. And they are, have to be more budget conscious than some of these other networks do. So they have to make decisions that keep things simpler, that they will render easily. Like that image that's just video playback on a screen of some sort. So they don't do a lot of the more dynamic effects that you see on things. But while that is, the information is being presented clearly. It's effective. I see, the data they want to see and the way they're presenting it looks good.
I think that's always the challenge is form over function, and figuring out where to, and I don't think anybody ever hits it just quite right. It's always a little too much of one or the other. Next question.
Next question in from Jeff Cohen in Miami Beach. Thoughts on the production value from the Associated Press? Another example.
I think it's hard for us to see them in real time or playing back. That's something we have to work on in our system, is to be able to light these up faster when they come in real time. So we'll keep going. Next question.
All right, we'll go to another question then from Jeff in Miami. I have my popcorn ready to watch the reviews while the focus is the graphics. If you notice any audio issues, I'd love to hear what there are and how they should have avoided them.
I think that the biggest challenge with audio issues is lavs and hard sets. like if you actually close your eyes and listen to almost anything on broadcast, you'll realize how bad the audio is, and probably why they can't notice that the fact that when people come in from their computer mics. Anyway, that gets kind of blended.
I do have one thing that I saw that drives me insane, and the problem's been solved because they can do broadcasts from racetracks where cars are zooming by. But why, when they do the cutaway to the guy in the room where the crowd's going bananas, can he not hear them from the studio? And his mic's always just really full of room noise. And, like I said, this problem's been solved. Why are these guys deploying these solutions that are just kind of half-assed?
I think that the issue is that the a lot of times they don't want it to look. So we in the event industry are always like, well, we can just use a WL 185 and put it on them, but then that looks really big, on them, and they don't want to do that, and they don't want to wear a headset because they're not used to that for those types of things. And so they end up with these regular lavs, and those regular lavs are often omnidirectional, not a cardioid. And so we end up hearing the audience. And a lot of times the producer wants to hear that audience, they want to hear that there. And then I don't know what it's like for your experience, but my experience when dealing with broadcast, I don't know what it is, but everyone wants to use POTS lines, and they want to use all kinds of stuff. And the audio going into the IFB is a disaster. Like, our Unity comms are way better than anything that we get. And it gets crunched down, and it gets tiny, and it's noisy, and it goes into their ear, and they can't understand it. And you're absolutely right. That technology is so there. And, but the big broadcast trucks are still they'll run someone through a little pipe all the way there and then stick it into their ear, and then they can't figure out why they can't hear them. There's these weird gaps in broadcast that I always find kind of amazing, but it's what it works on a day-to-day basis. Next question.
Next question in from Brandon Buttram in Indianapolis, Indiana. Do you ever get feedback and complaints that the motion is too fast, too slow, and causes unwanted physical effects like dizziness or upset stomachs? If so, how do you handle that?
You guys ever get?
I could definitely speak to that specifically, because that was something that we wanted to when we're moving from these different parts of this like set that has a real size. And I think people, whether or not you've ever been to the U.S. Capitol building, it has a sense of scale that I think most viewers can understand. And so moving between these, physical locations that are pretty far apart, you want to do it in a way that doesn't leave the talent having to fill time and they can just get to it. But why we ended up with incredibly quick transitions. And that in some ways is a little disorienting, but then it's also like, if you take your time, it's like, well, this is not an art project. You're trying to tell people a story that's specifically going with what the talent's talking about. So that's kind of what they were balancing. And I have no clue if we were able to at all reach that level of success if it being not, disorienting. But we did try to limit in general a lot of Dutch angles from our moves. I mean, a lot of times that can make it feel more kinetic and more of that drone flight style. And we do it sometimes in a couple of these moves, but we've noticed that that's a big thing that like will set off your stomach a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think Chris hit it on the head when he mentioned scale. I think what's interesting about what you guys are doing is most people are going to watch it on their TV at home. And yes, there's different sized TVs. I run into this problem a lot about animation speeds on some of the big screens I did. I just got back from Denver where I did the screen I was editing for was 180 feet wide by 20 feet tall. And, you have a little subtle thing in the background and, because I'm working on a 27-inch display here at home. And then you get there and you're like, oh, wow, yeah, that really has to be scaled back. Also, I'll say that it's very interesting. I've noticed in the last couple of years, both my wife and especially my sister-in-law have enormous aversions to any rotational stuff. Like a top-down, artistic, like even if it's designed to make you feel uneasy, they literally just cover their eyes and won't watch it. But like a rotational thing or the classic, just a hard pan that goes around over 180 degrees, they literally turn away from the screen. It's very interesting how some people are so adverse to certain types of movement.
Yeah, go, Bo.
Yeah, like Chris was saying, like this move right here, it's unfortunate that in production it ends up being so fast just to get to the actual data, because we saw some offline, clips of the Steadicam or the jib just exploring the space for fun, and seeing that set extension and seeing it track and seeing the edges, like it really, you can't really see it, but there's like the fence railing extends out into the studio. Like it really does feel like you're there. I mean, it's such a cool effect that in the live production, you don't really get the same feel. So it is unfortunate. You end up having to make those compromises and make it faster than, the designers would like.
Yeah. And I think it'll get worse as we move to, there are a lot of people, almost every device that we're buying now is 120 frames a second. Like we're almost there, and so, and then I will tell you that on a large screen, 80, 85 or bigger, if it fills from the work that I've done, if the frame fills your field of view and it's 120 frames per second and it moves much at all, it's not a handful of people that don't like it. A lot of people get sick real fast, because your brain is no longer processing it as frames; it's processing it as a window, and you suddenly suck in because it's it pulls you in, and I'm almost impervious to that, and I can't do that. So it's going to be, as we increase frame rate, it'll be interesting. Yeah, Chris, real quick, and then we'll go to the next question.
I'll pass. It's a longer question.
Yep. Next question.
Rob Collins, Kansas City, Missouri asked, how do the graphics that use live data in them get or use the data to show? How does the information process from receiving the number to displaying the info on screen?
You can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
One of the ways that we take advantage of real-time data is a plugin for Voyager called Data Link, and that's something that's across all of our ROS products, but it's basically intermediary software that allows you to take a lot of different flavors of data, whether that's reading Excel sheets, JSON files, XML files. I mean, you can take scoreboard data inside of an arena. You can do a lot of different things. But what we were able to work with Fox specifically, and they have a proprietary software that is able to parse the data they're getting from the AP. So first, the AP is providing data, which most likely is on an online database that's, authenticated, and they're able to access it. And then from there, their software is able to parse that and put it into its individual like component races and an overall.
And what format is that in? What's the format of the data itself?
So what we end up, I'm not sure what it is before it gets to us, but they give it to us in a JSON file that's written onto a network area storage that we're able to access through data link. And so there's one central data link server that's running that all of our machines are able to talk to. And so it's set up to basically query the server for new data you can set a bunch of different, time frames. Basically, you're trying to balance like it being most up to date with also not taxing it too much. So we tend to ask on this was every 500 milliseconds, it was asking again. And then from there, it was up to the project itself to then interpret that data. So one of the things was that like there's basically a JSON file that has a structure that has, who am I showing? Like what's the candidate's name on the left side? What's the candidate's name on the right side? Like what's the count and everything like that. And if certain fields that we chose that were important fields, that if they didn't change, basically the graphic wouldn't change. So if like, as long as the name didn't change, it wouldn't like flip to the next candidate or something like that. But as vote counts, percentages were changing, that was allowed to update live. And so what's really cool with Data Link is you can have it set up to basically on command update or update when you want it to, or not when it wanted to, but when the data changes, when it senses a data change. So a lot of that was automated for us just with our tool. But then you kind of had to make decisions on the blueprint side within Unreal. And your SPO showing right now. So every time you saw a flip between one candidate and the next, that was based on someone upstream of the operator, the graphics operator, would make a decision saying, okay, we're going to the next race. And so that JSON file would update and our system would be like, okay, now we're going to go ahead and do the flip, pull that file. And one of the things that we're most proud of here is that we're not actually using an external like CG solution to be doing any of this like text. This is all being done directly in Voyager, directly in the Unreal Engine. So that's pretty cool that we've been able to get it to function almost as seamless as what you're used to with traditional CG tools.
And Lenny, is that similar for how VizRT handles it?
Yeah, the data just comes in from the same source. I mean, it's all AP data, and then it's stored in a central location with a data link manager. It's the same process.
Yep. All right, next question.
Brandon Buttram is back from Indianapolis, Indiana. What tools do you use to take measurements of these studios?
Does anyone know what are you using LiDAR, or are you using, like, how is that handled?
I'll say they don't usually measure the studios. They build the elements and place them after the camera tracking system's put in place, and that kind of does all the measuring. And then they'll set the element, do some camera moves and check it, make sure that it's attached to the floor where it's supposed to be or attached to the ceiling, the graphics attached where it's supposed to be. And it'll just go from there. Like the many times we've done it, we've never done any physical measurements with a tape or a laser or anything like that.
You go to Mitchell real quick.
Is it perhaps you shoot some reflection maps to help with your 3D?
Not really.
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward. I mean, you set the engine up, you set the camera tracking system, the Stipe system in many of the installations that we've done, and it says, okay, here's where all these surfaces are. It knows where the floor is, it knows where the walls are, right. And it creates a geometry inside of its system, and then you attach your graphics where you want them to be inside of the overall model, if you will, and then you control your animations from there.
Go ahead, Bo.
Yeah, I mean, we've done it both ways. Sometimes you just kind of wing it and get it to fit and make it look right. And as long as the tracking locks in, you're good. On longer deployments, we've taken, like we've done sets before, not for elections, but for other things. We've done sets before where we actually get the set CAD model from the set designer, and then we'll bring that in, and that'll be to scale. And we're able to do fly-throughs and pre-vises and stuff like that before the set actually gets built. So we've done that. We've done, the LiDAR measurement kind of thing and brought it in to get the measurements right. And then we've also done, if a studio has, a desk, you measure the desk, you get that right, and then everything else kind of fits into place. And then you had mentioned reflection maps. So yeah, a lot of times we'll take like a 360-degree photo and we'll bring that in as an HDRI, so you can get some reflections on there. There have been a couple times where we pipe that in as a camera feed, so you get live reflections, which is kind of overkill in most cases. But I definitely have some graphics that I wish I had back, where we have the daytime reflection loaded for a nighttime shot, things like that. So there's a lot of little gotchas.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons that I scan most things, I have an inexpensive BLK 360 and then a relatively inexpensive BLK 360, and then I use Pharaohs a lot, and sometimes sometimes it's ZNF. And the main thing was I realized how long it was taking my modeler to do all the measurements, and like to try to figure everything out. And I realized that it was just cost effective to just get a scan, of it when it exists before you get there. Is just scan it, because it was, especially if you own one, it's nothing. It's like part of your walkthrough, and all that time you spent trying to like measure this to this and this to this and this to this, you just put the scanner in there and drop it down like 2 or 3 times, and you get all the measurements for the next 6 months are all like, what was that? Or things you forgot to measure are all still there. Next question.
Next question is in from me, and my question is, what were the major graphics fails on election night that we never noticed?
Go ahead, Lenny.
Well, the first rule is you test everything a lot. You check everything a lot. And if it's not going to work, you don't do it, or you work around it, because there's many different setups and many
I've seen
different
some
ways
graphics
of telling
recently where
these
they obviously did not do that.
But that being said, there are little errors that happen. Like, for example, I can show you this little clip here. Like, if you look at the floor here and the way that graphic, it will kind of bounce on you. That's either
I think like reflections.
Well, if you look at the actual model on the floor when it plays, the camera starts moving and it jumps. That's kind of the extent of some of the errors that we see when we're doing this, because again, if it's not going to work, they just don't show it, or they'll do something different, or they'll go to the magic board, because that can gobble up a lot of time in these shows where they're just analyzing all the stuff on the maps and the guys doing the touchscreen stuff. That's kind of the way these things I've seen in my experience, that they just won't do it at all. They'll get away from it as fast as they can.
Yeah, absolutely, Bo.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to get hosed, especially when you have so much different data coming in. Not only the candidate data, like I saw one graphic where the last names just said candidate versus candidate, and I think that was most likely an operator getting too click happy, and some edge cases where the operator does some things that the designer, the developer didn't expect them to. Then also like Lenny was showing the tracking stuff, that stuff is, the tracking data is coming in at, a 60, at least one frame or one tracking packet every 16 milliseconds. And if you take a slight network hit, or there's any sort of network congestion, some of those packets get tied up, you get tracking hits like that. There's you'll notice a good many little things like that if you start paying attention, but there's a lot of ways for it to, go wonky.
Next question.
From Dennis Wojtek in New Kensington, Pennsylvania. How difficult is it to get data integrated into the graphics, and what sources are used?
I think we kind of talked through that as far as how to get the data through there in that step-by-step process. Next question.
Brandon Buttram from Indianapolis, Indiana. Did you physically mock up any of those studios, or are you 100% digital after taking the studio measurements?
So you didn't And I guess the studios are kind of updated for the election night, so some of it's all built out. But did they change much? I mean, in structure, are they all pretty much the same?
I just don't know. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, all good.
I know most of our stuff is done digitally ahead of time. There's really let's see. There's no mocking up, no physical mocking up of anything.
Right.
That's for sure.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asked, could an open source platform like SPX be adopted for use in election graphics?
I think that SPX is actually used in some elections in Europe, so it definitely can be. Of course, these are pretty heavy duty lifts, but there should be no reason why it couldn't be used in a sometimes a little bit more straightforward way. Go ahead, Bo.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of the stuff you see, you could build an Unreal Engine. You might need some extra bits and pieces for the data and all the little hooks to control it and make it performant. But there's a lot of ways to get close to this.
Yeah.
With kind of off the shelf stuff.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, how are they creating the 3D text in the virtual capital clip? In my limited 3D experience, you have to create the text and then manually extrude it to the desired size.
So I could speak to that.
Mm-hmm.
We were using the Text 3D plugin, which is technically still like a beta plugin for the Unreal Engine, but we use it all the time, not like it's not a beta. But basically, you're able to do pretty simple stuff like import a font and apply font size, extrusion, bevel, coloring, and that sort of thing. But essentially what it is a blueprint actor that is creating meshes dynamically when it has text entered into it. So that's like at the very basic level, what's happening there. But then from our control blueprints that are basically putting the data in those sections, we're setting things like max width, we're setting, how quickly they update. And that's kind of being controlled. But everything you're seeing here text-wise is not a pre-rendered mesh that's imported, like the word Missouri's that actually was just generated. The things that are pre-rendered from here, the photos, the backgrounds, but the photo and the backgrounds aren't together. They're actually separate. And then, obviously the texturing and that sort of thing is something that's done before. But yeah, all the text is being generated live.
Because a lot of it's just defining it. It's defining what the text is going to look like. I mean, I think that was my first introduction to VizRT was in Fox Sports, which was, Maya was being used to basically define all the geometry, define the bits and pieces that are there, and then VizRT just simply went and grabbed all of that data and put it in dynamically. In that case, it was the data for a football game, but it was. But that's how that kind of came together.
I just want to tag on the end of that. When we were looking at this stuff, we got to remember that this is all real-time rendering. This isn't any post-processing of any kind. So these engines are taking this data, taking the models and the fonts, basically the font geometry, and just putting those things together and rendering it as fast as it can. Now, if you've ever seen this stuff when it's actually produced, there's usually a couple seconds of latency that exists, but because it's going out to broadcast, nobody really worries about that because there's no live in-studio audience. But that's one of these things you got to look at when you're putting these things together. Is this has got to get done rapidly, and there's no chance to slow down and render everything. It's created at a speed that is insane.
It's I think live is definitely the most, and same thing with video, when we talk about people, when you work with film folks and they want it to be a film camera or they want to use a thing, and we're like, well, there's some practicality issues that are related to that are different in live than they are in post. Go ahead, Bo.
Yeah, I'm just impressed that y'all get away with several seconds of latency because we get hammered for every frame. We're sitting around usually around 12, 15 frames of latency end to end. So, it's like you said, it's very real time. You have to build these scenes so that they're performant and don't drop frames. Next question.
And it's for me again. At what point do the graphics get in the way of the story?
In a lot of ways, that's kind of the challenge, isn't it? I mean, that is always that's not our job normally. Usually our job is to go as high as anyone asks us to go. But I do think that it's hard to keep people watching one channel. I think that's where a lot of this graphics come from. Go ahead, Lenny.
Well, there's this one network that does a lot of graphics, and as you can see, they just have an explosion of information, and it's a personal opinion of mine that that's a little bit much, but I can tell you to make that particular composition, I think there's 7 render engines making all of that data running through a multi-play system. So yeah, it can get to be too much if you ask me.
Yeah, go ahead, Debo.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say graphics like this, they're pretty, but it's really hard to find the data. The data can be really small. So I think, you need to focus on what's important, whether it's the data or the graphic. And sometimes graphics, they focus a little more on the design than they do the function.
Yeah. And it's, and again, usually it's a different team. There's one team that's accountable for the content and the other team that's accountable for displaying it in the coolest way possible. But I do think that I used to eschew a lot of the graphics that we would use and so on and so forth. I wanted to keep it simple. Even here, we keep it to a pretty simple approach. And that's partially just to manage resources, but it's also partially because we just like it to be, you to focus on the story. But I do think the biggest challenge for a lot of these networks is there's an arms race that happens between all of them that if you have something very basic, people are just less likely to stay there, especially when everybody else is producing something that's snazzy. So I think that is a real challenge for a lot of folks there. Next, I think this is the last question of the hour. Go ahead.
All right, last question from Jeff Cohen in Miami Beach.
No, go ahead with this one. There's one more.
Nod to broadcasters recognizing mobile users that watch the YouTube. Zoom to fill. CBS did zoom to fill. CBS normal zoom, and CNN did not.
I think that's it's kind of outside of the graphics. It's kind of a framing issue, but what to do with what people are watching there. Go ahead, Lenny.
Just something that VizRT is working on right now is what we call adaptive graphics. So depending on whatever platform you're rendering to, the Viz engine can take the data and the pre-designed containers that you've built basically, and it will say, okay, this is a square frame, for example, and it'll reorient the graphics so that they fit within the framing of that viewport basically. So kind of same way that, CSS renders responsive design for a web page. This is something that our engineers are working on, and they've started to release in the latest Viz Engine 5. And it's pretty neat when you start to see it work, because you can see the engine's automatically just saying, okay, we're rendering for this frame size, for example, whether it be vertical or horizontal or square.
And a lot of times that's just a template, right? I mean, the template for the 1x1 template for 9x16. I know when we did it, we did a show where we had it was in 360, 16x9 and 9x16. and all of them had to go out at the same time. And for us, it was just a series of templates, and just grab me the data and throw it in there. Let's go to the last question.
Last question in from Douglas Carmichael. Bo, how would you compare the ROS control panel builder you were showing to a general AV control solution like Universe Isadora?
Go ahead, Bo. Nope, can't hear you, Bo.
Sorry about that. Yeah, very similar. So Ross has their dashboard product that we use for most command and control, and it's got all the same hooks. You can get data from APIs. You can send any sort of web command to cameras or whatever. It's essentially JavaScript with some extra stuff in it. So you can build buttons. You can you can bring in live data. You can do all kind of stuff like, just a quick, this was the Fox panel. This is a panel that I had just thrown together to control Zoom ISO, to get the user list and send to outputs. This is a panel that I use for my LG 4K TV to do, full screen or quad box. So there's all kind of things you can do with ROS dashboard software, whether or not you have ROS equipment. It's free, downloadable, cross-platform thing. So it is an app. It's not a web page situation, but it's a lot of fun to play with, and you can control a lot of the stuff in your control room. You can also bring in NDI feeds, so you can literally bring in like a multi-viewer and make it clickable, so you can create a touch screen. So there's
That's
a little
awesome.
plug for that. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do with it.
Thought of a use
Completely
for that.
free.
I thought of the use for that touchscreen. I got to think about that a little bit. All right. Thanks so much. Thank you to Lenny, Bo, and Chris. It's so great to have you. Just really, it's just getting the inside information on how that works. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. Really makes a difference. And thanks to our producers who asked all the great questions, kept everything going. Thanks to the rest of the panelists. We can't do this without you. And thanks to the incredible team that gets here every 7 days a week and puts together this event from all over the world. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. Yeah, Lenny, you might have been here.